For 80 years, Japan held to one principle: never again. The only nation to suffer atomic bombings built its entire security identity around restraint. Then, in November 2025, Japan's defense minister publicly opened the door to nuclear-powered submarines. Japan's top naval officer called nuclear propulsion an overwhelming advantage. Within weeks, Beijing labeled the move neo-militarism. A record $58 billion defense budget followed, the 14th consecutive annual increase. What's unfolding is not a procurement debate. It's the unraveling of the most consequential military restraint since 1945, and no one has defined where it ends. Shindro Koizumi's November 2025 statement did not arise from a media flurry or offhand remark. On national television, the defense minister spoke with deliberate clarity, introducing nuclear-powered submarines as a subject of official state debate. His phrasing was careful, but unmistakable. Japan, he said, must consider options already in the hands of neighboring powers. This was not a trial balloon. It was a controlled signal, delivered in the language of national necessity rather than political theater. Within days, the Chief of Staff of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force reinforced the message with a technical briefing. Nuclear propulsion, he argued, offered an overwhelming advantage, a phrase that cut through decades of doctrinal restraint. The briefing outlined how such submarines could remain submerged for months, operate at higher sustained speeds, and patrol far beyond the reach of diesel-electric boats. This was not speculation. It was an institutional argument presented at the highest level, and it gave the nuclear option a new legitimacy in Tokyo's defense planning. The government's approach was systematic. Every statement, from cabinet officials to senior officers, treated the issue as a matter of strategic calculation. The language was measured, but the intent was clear. Japan was not drifting into this debate. It was stepping into it with the full weight of official authority. The taboo around nuclear propulsion, long protected by constitutional tradition and the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was now being challenged not by accident, but by design. Chinese state media reacted with rare speed and intensity. The Global Times, a frequent barometer of official sentiment, labeled Japan's nuclear submarine debate as neo-militarism within hours of the first cabinet-level statements. This language, echoing historical anxieties, was not reserved for op-eds alone. It appeared in formal editorials and was quickly amplified by foreign ministry spokespeople. The timing was no coincidence. Just as the editorial circulated, Japan's cabinet approved its fiscal year 2026 defense budget in December 2025. The total, 9.04 trillion yen, or roughly $58 billion, set a new record for post-war Japan. It was the 14th consecutive annual increase, a streak unmatched in the nation's modern history. The budget's scale and persistence left little room for ambiguity. This was not a passing policy experiment, but a sustained commitment to military expansion. For Beijing, the convergence of public rhetoric and financial muscle transformed a doctrinal debate into a tangible shift in the regional order. No other country carries the memory of nuclear devastation as acutely as Japan. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 left physical scars and a legacy of moral restraint that has shaped every discussion of nuclear technology since. In the decades that followed, national identity became intertwined with a commitment to peace, embodied in the three non-nuclear principles: not possessing, not producing, and not permitting the introduction of nuclear weapons. These principles, first articulated in 1967 and later adopted by the Diet, have remained a powerful reference point for Japanese policy, even as security threats have evolved. Public memory of the bombings is not distant history. It is a living force. Survivors groups, city assemblies, and civil society organizations continue to press the government to avoid any step that could erode the anti-nuclear norm. The distinction between nuclear weapons and nuclear propulsion is clear in technical terms, but politically, the line is less defined. Nuclear-powered submarines do not carry atomic warheads, yet the word nuclear alone triggers deep anxieties and debate. For many, the move toward nuclear propulsion is not just a question of military capability. but a test of national values, shaped by tragedy. The debate reaches beyond strategy, touching the core of what it means for Japan to remain true to its post-war identity. Japan's post-war security architecture rests on two pillars: Article Number 9 of the 1947 Constitution and the Yoshida Doctrine. Article Number 9, drafted under Allied occupation, states that the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. It further prohibits the maintenance of land, sea, or air forces with war potential. For decades, this clause has been interpreted narrowly, limiting the self-defense forces to strictly defensive roles and keeping military spending near 1% of GDP. The Yoshida Doctrine, named for Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, cemented this pacifist stance in the early 1950s. The strategy was clear: prioritize economic recovery, avoid military entanglements, and rely on the U.S. security umbrella for protection. This framework shaped every major defense decision for nearly 80 years, keeping Japan's military posture minimalist and focused on home defense. Submarine procurement, for example, was justified only as a means to protect vital sea lanes and deter encroachment, never as a tool for power projection. The current debate over nuclear-powered submarines challenges the entire structure. It is not a matter of upgrading hardware, but of redefining the limits of what Japan considers permissible under its constitutional and strategic doctrine. The question now facing policymakers is whether the legal and strategic boundaries that have defined Japan since 1947 can contain the pressures of a rapidly changing security environment. On October 29, 2025, a single message from Washington cut through years of regional caution. Donald Trump, then leading U.S. policy on East Asia, publicly endorsed South Korea's ambition to build nuclear-powered submarines. His words, broadcast on Truth Social and echoed in major outlets, confirmed direct American support for the transfer of nuclear propulsion technology to Seoul. For Japan's security establishment, this was not a routine alliance gesture. It was a precedent and unmistakable signal that the United States now viewed nuclear propulsion as a legitimate path for its closest partners in Northeast Asia. Inside Tokyo's defense circles, the reaction was immediate and intense. The Korea shock, as it became known in policy briefings, was less about South Korea itself and more about the collapse of a previous political barrier. Japanese officials recognized that Washington had reframed the boundaries of Allied deterrence. If South Korea could pursue nuclear submarines with U.S. blessing, the logic holding Japan back began to unravel. The old assumption that only a handful of powers could field such vessels without risking alliance friction no longer applied. This shift did more than open a technical debate. It gave Japanese leaders political cover to discuss nuclear propulsion openly, framing it as a matter of parity rather than provocation. The alliance dynamic changed overnight. With the United States backing Seoul's program, Tokyo's own pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines moved from hypothetical to plausible, and the debate accelerated from behind closed doors to the center of national security planning. Japan's submarine fleet, at present, stands at 22 vessels, each one built around diesel-electric propulsion. These boats, including the Soryu and Taige classes, are optimized for stealth and coastal defense, but their operational envelope is defined by battery life. After roughly 2 to 3 days submerged, even the most advanced Japanese subs must surface or extend a snorkel mast to recharge. This act, necessary to keep the batteries alive, exposes the submarine to detection by satellites, aircraft, and maritime patrols. In a contested environment, every minute above periscope depth increases vulnerability. Nuclear propulsion, by contrast, transforms the calculus. A nuclear-powered submarine can remain submerged for months, limited only by food supplies and crew endurance. The reactor's fuel cycle, measured in decades, means the vessel can cross oceans, patrol distant choke points, and maintain a continuous underwater presence far from home waters. The operational difference is not incremental, but absolute, where a diesel-electric boat must plan its patrols around battery recharge and proximity to friendly bases. A nuclear sub can vanish into the deep and reappear on the far side of the Pacific without warning. This leap in endurance and reach comes at a steep price. Japan's current diesel-electric boats cost between $1 and $1.2 billion each. The U.S. Virginia class, serving as the open benchmark for nuclear attack submarines, carries a price tag of about $5.8 billion per vessel, nearly 5 times higher. The cost reflects not only the reactor, but also the complexity of integrating nuclear safety, higher sustained speed, and global navigation capability into a single platform. For Japan, moving to nuclear propulsion would mean shifting from a force designed for regional denial to one capable of persistent blue water operations. The strategic gain is clear, but so is the financial and industrial commitment required to achieve it. Japan's debate over nuclear-powered submarines is only one layer in a wider transformation of national defense. The 2026 budget allocates 970 billion yen specifically for standoff missile systems, a figure that places long-range strike capability at the center of Japan's new deterrence architecture. The upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missile now reaches roughly 1,000 kilometers, extending the country's ability to hold distant targets at risk. This range puts much of the East China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, and even parts of the Chinese mainland within striking distance from Japanese territory. Missile acquisition is not an isolated project. Arms exports, once taboo, have become normalized through recent legislative reforms and high-profile deals with partners like Australia. Defense industrial cooperation is now routine, with Japanese firms participating in joint development programs for next-generation fighters and missile systems. The new fighter, still under wraps in technical detail, is being designed as part of a broader modernization ecosystem that links air, sea, and missile assets into a single networked force. The spending trajectory is equally significant. 14 consecutive years of budget increases have propelled Japan toward the world's third largest military outlay, surpassing traditional European powers. The government's stated goal is to reach 2% of GDP by 2027, breaking the informal ceiling that held for decades under the Yoshida Doctrine. Each of these moves, missile expansion, export liberalization, fighter development, and sustained budget growth, feeds into a layered deterrence. Nuclear-powered submarines, if realized, would slot into this architecture as the most ambitious element, but not the only one. Together, these initiatives signal a deliberate shift from minimalist defense to a posture capable of counterstrike and sustained power projection across the Western Pacific. China's naval modernization has produced aircraft carriers, advanced missiles, and a growing surface fleet. But one vulnerability remains stubbornly exposed beneath the waves. Anti-submarine warfare, ASW, has long been regarded as the weakest link in the People's Liberation Army Navy. Years of investment have not erased the gap. Carrier strike groups, the pride of the PLAN, depend on a defensive screen that is still learning to hunt silent threats in deep water. A persistent fleet of Japanese nuclear-powered submarines would press directly against this weakness. Unlike diesel-electric boats, which must surface or snorkel every few days, SSNs can linger for months, tracking carrier movements and shadowing supply convoys across the Western Pacific. The mere possibility of a Japanese SSN undetected near a Chinese carrier forces Beijing to divert scarce helicopters, maritime patrol aircraft, and surface escorts to constant ASW duty, diluting the offensive punch of its carrier groups. Geography amplifies the problem. The first and second island chains, running from the Japanese home islands through Taiwan, the Philippines, and into the Central Pacific, form natural barriers and choke points. Control of these maritime routes has always shaped the region's balance of power. Nuclear-powered submarines, with their unmatched endurance, can patrol these straits continuously, denying the PLAN easy access to the open ocean and threatening any attempt to project power beyond the East China Sea. Endurance becomes leverage. A single undetected SSN at a choke point can disrupt entire fleet movements and force adversaries to operate under constant uncertainty. In the Western Pacific, where the margin for error is measured in hours and kilometers, the undersea gap is not just a technical shortcoming for China, it is a strategic liability. Japan's move toward nuclear propulsion threatens to widen that gap, shifting the calculus not only for Beijing's admirals, but for every state that relies on these contested waters. A single nuclear-powered submarine, undetected and persistent, can shadow multiple surface groups, forcing China to treat every stretch of ocean as potentially contested. The effect is not linear. It multiplies across the map. One Japanese SSN operating near the Miyako Strait can disrupt an entire carrier strike group's schedule, while another, near the Bashi Channel, can threaten supply lines running between the Chinese coast and the broader Pacific. For every submarine Japan fields, China must assign not just one, but several anti-submarine warfare escorts, frigates, destroyers, maritime patrol aircraft, and helicopters, each pulled from other missions to guard against a threat that may or may not be present. The cost equation is stark. Japan invests in a handful of high-end submarines, but China must cover vast sea lanes and every major fleet movement with layers of ASW assets. The burden grows heavier when factoring in alliance dynamics. Japanese SSNS would not operate alone. Coordinated patrols with American and Australian submarines, already practiced in joint exercises, extend the uncertainty for Chinese planners. Every additional Allied submarine compounds the challenge, requiring Beijing to stretch its detection networks and escort formations ever thinner. This is the logic of cost asymmetry. For every dollar Tokyo spends on a nuclear-powered boat, China must spend multiples to defend against the possibility of its presence. The operational math favors the undersea threat. One submarine, many countermeasures. In the Western Pacific, the response is not just difficult, it is expensive, enduring, and, for Beijing, fundamentally unsolvable with quick fixes or incremental spending. Japan's defense transformation did not unfold overnight, nor did it hinge on a single dramatic act. The 2022 security strategy laid the foundation, openly rejecting the minimalist defense posture that had defined the Yoshida Doctrine since the early 1950s. Instead of rewriting the Constitution, policymakers chose a path of reinterpretation and incremental policy shifts. Cabinet decisions in 2014 and 2022 expanded the meaning of Article 9, first to allow collective self-defense, then to permit advanced capabilities deemed essential for national security. Each move accumulated, gradually eroding the old boundaries without a formal amendment. By 2026, the trajectory had become unmistakable. The record defense budget, the normalization of arms exports, and the open debate on nuclear propulsion all pointed to a consolidated new doctrine. The Yoshida Doctrine, once the bedrock of Japan's security identity, has not vanished in a single stroke. It is being dismantled in stages, each reinterpretation, each new capability, each budget increase, quietly replacing the old order with a new strategic reality. Washington's response to Japan's defense expansion has grown steadily more pragmatic. Rising budgets and new capabilities are now interpreted less as a cause for concern than as evidence of burden sharing in a region where the United States faces stretch commitments. Official statements from both U.S. administrations in the 2020s have welcomed Japan's moves, framing them as necessary contributions to Allied deterrence, rather than departures from post-war restraint. This acceptance is echoed in the actions of other partners. Australia, for example, has deepened defense industrial cooperation and signaled openness to Japanese participation in AUKUS-related technology sharing. South Korea's own nuclear submarine ambitions have become a parallel, not a provocation. Across the region, what once would have triggered alarm now registers as a new normal, yet the boundaries of Japan's military normalization remain undefined. The constitutional reinterpretations of Article 9 have accumulated without a formal amendment, leaving the ultimate legal ceiling ambiguous. Each policy shift, collective self-defense, long-range strike, nuclear propulsion, has been justified as a response to specific threats, but none has set a final limit. The process is incremental, not absolute. As a result, the trajectory of Japan's military posture is clear, but its destination is not. The debate no longer centers on whether normalization is happening, but on how far it will go and where, if anywhere, it will stop. Japan's shift to nuclear-powered submarines marks a deliberate end to the Yoshida Doctrine's ceiling, legally, strategically, and technologically. With a defense budget now exceeding 8.5 trillion yen and Article 9 under reinterpretation, the Pacific balance tilts. China's alarm signals the arrival of a new era, defined not by precedent, but by capability. The trajectory is set, but the limits and consequences remain unresolved. Where deterrence stops, escalation begins. Share your perspective below.